My brother is furious with me because I refused to support him after his wife cheated on him for the third time, but now he's homeless because she filed for divorce. Hi everyone, this is a long and complicated story, but I'll try my best to break it down as clearly as possible. My name is Amante, and I'm 32 years old. My younger brother Ethan is 29. We grew up in a close-knit family, but the dynamics have changed in recent years because of the issues in his marriage. Ethan met Amber, his wife, 8 years ago when they were in college. They seemed like the perfect couple, always affectionate and full of laughter. After graduating, they got married, and everything appeared to be going well. But 5 years ago, Ethan called me, completely shattered, to share that Amber had cheated on him with one of her coworkers. He was heartbroken and struggled to make sense of what had happened. After endless conversations, tears, and attempts at reconciliation, they decided to work on their marriage. For the next 2 years, things seemed to stabilize. Ethan often told me they were happier than ever and that the betrayal had made their bond stronger. They even started planning to have children. Unfortunately, 3 years ago, Ethan called me again, sobbing. Amber had cheated on him again, this time with one of his close friends. It was an even greater blow. Ethan fell into a deep depression, barely leaving the house for months. Eventually, after much insistence from me and our parents, Ethan decided to forgive Amber once again and give his marriage another chance. I couldn't understand his decision. How could he forgive her after being betrayed twice? I tried reasoning with him, but Ethan refused to hear me out. He insisted that he loved Amber and couldn't imagine his life without her. Each time she cheated, it became a pattern. Ethan would show up at my house, pour his heart out for hours, and recount every detail of their issues. Then, a few weeks later, he'd try again with Amber. No matter what I said, no matter what I did, it was a total waste of time because, in the end, he'd do whatever he felt was right, and the whole cycle would start again. The worst part is that the first time, he at least had friends to talk to, which weren't many, including the last guy Amber cheated with. But the last time he had fewer friends, and he'd stay at my house from when I got home from work until almost bedtime, only because I'd tell him I needed to go to sleep, since I had to get up early for work the next day. And still, Ethan would continue talking about his problems with Amber, how she treats him, and all the good things she does for him. So, usually he'd stay 1 or 2 hours past the time I'd normally go to bed. In the end, 3 weeks later, he talked to Amber, and they managed to resolve things. So it might sound bad to say, but it was a complete waste of my time. I understand the pain someone goes through when they've been cheated on, but it should be a sign to end that relationship, especially if it's the second time it happens. But that's how Ethan is. But back to the present. 2 years have passed since the second infidelity, and to be honest, I don't think their marriage has improved much. They still experience constant highs and lows, and Ethan lives in a state of unease, plagued by distrust, which is not surprising given everything that has happened. Last weekend, Ethan called me again, distraught. He told me that once again Amber had cheated on him, this time with the next-door neighbor. He was devastated and begged to come over to talk, but this time I had no patience left. I told Ethan he needed to face the situation himself and make the tough decisions necessary to break free from this toxic relationship. I love my brother, but I can't keep being his emotional crutch when he refuses to take action. Every time I support him and he forgives Amber, I feel like I'm enabling him to stay in an unhealthy cycle. So, I stood my ground and told him he couldn't come over this time. It was time for him to confront his reality and make choices for his own well-being. I told him I supported him, but I couldn't keep consoling him every time Amber hurt him. Ethan got furious with me and told me I was a bad sister for not being there for him in his time of greatest need. Our parents also scolded me for not being there for my little brother. Yes, those were the words of my parents, even though he's a 29-year-old man. I could understand it if it were his first heartbreak at 15, but he's an adult now. He doesn't need to come to my house to talk to me. He needs to go see a lawyer to divorce that serial cheater and move on with his life. I'm willing to help him in any way necessary, but only if he takes the right path. And don't think I'm being close-minded. If he wanted to have an open marriage and let Amber be with other people, that's his problem. I might not agree with it, but if it makes him happy, who am I to tell him not to go for it? But it's clear that this whole situation doesn't make him happy. And although he hasn't consented to an open marriage, that's practically what Amber seems to be doing. However, I'm here to ask, should I have comforted him anyway? Or did I do the right thing by setting boundaries in this toxic situation? I think I'm right here, but I also want to hear advice from people who have dealt with a similar situation. For example, a family member or friend who doesn't want to listen to your advice regarding one or more infidelities, as is the case here. For example, a friend of mine told me when I asked her about this, that she had a similar situation, but with a friend whose boyfriend was cheating on her, and she found out. But when she tried to tell her friend, not only did she not believe her, but she also cut her out of her life. And my friend was very sure of what she had seen. Edit. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I've been asked about my relationship with Amber. It's a normal relationship between sisters-in-law. We're not best friends, but we don't get along badly either. The only problem I have with her is that she's a cheater, and I hate cheaters. Which also gets me into trouble, because if I comfort Ethan and say something bad about Amber, which she deserves, nothing prevents that when they reconcile, which is very likely to happen, it could come back to bite me. And without a doubt, I prefer to avoid any kind of drama. Something like this happened during her first affair, and it was quite uncomfortable during family gatherings between us. So during her second affair, I just nodded my head and said things like, "Everything will get better." After hours and hours of the same, there wasn't much more to say. Update 1. First of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment and share their opinion about my situation. Reading your advice, and especially your experiences, has made me feel better. Also, the general consensus has been that I did the right thing by not continuing to affirm my brother's behavior. So, I wasn't the bad one in this whole situation. After my last post, I can tell you that, just as I feared, Ethan got back together with Amber after about 2.5 weeks. Despite my efforts to make him understand that this relationship is toxic and harmful for him, Ethan simply cannot or does not want to see the reality. I told him during the last 2 affairs, and I told him again the last time he called me. It deeply hurts me to see him continue sinking into this cycle of deceit and betrayal. I know I love him, and I only want the best for him, but sometimes I feel like I'm trying to draw water from a bottomless well or from a sinking ship. But the truth is, I can no longer continue being Ethan's emotional support every time Amber hurts him. I feel like, by doing that, all I'm doing is prolonging his suffering and preventing him from making the decisions he really needs to make to heal and rebuild his life. I know my stance may seem harsh or insensitive, but I assure you it's not. I love my brother, and it pains me deeply to see him go through all of this. But I believe that sometimes the true act of love is to tell things as they are, no matter how painful it may be. In fact, it's not easy for me, especially since I refused to comfort him that time, and Ethan has stopped talking to me, as have our parents. I guess they are still upset with me for not being there to support him. So, even though I haven't had any contact with Ethan or my parents since then, I'm standing firm in my position. I will continue to be here for him when he's ready to hear the truth and take control of his life. But I won't go back to being his shoulder to cry on every time Amber betrays him. I firmly believe that will only continue to hurt him more. I suppose this resolves my problem, at least for the moment, until Ethan gets cheated on again, which usually happens every 2 or 3 years. Update 2. Last night, I received a call from my mother. It was a very intense conversation in which we delved deeply into everything that has been happening with my brother Ethan and his marriage to Amber. At first, my mother was very upset with me for not going to comfort Ethan when he asked me to. She said that I should be there for him in such difficult times, no matter how many times Amber has cheated on him. She scolded me for being a bad sister and not supporting my little brother. I tried to make her understand my point of view, explaining that while I understand Ethan's suffering, continuing to comfort him every time this happens is only keeping him trapped in a toxic cycle. I told her that I firmly believe that, over time, Ethan needs to make the decision to end this relationship for his own good. After much discussion, my mother finally admitted that maybe I was right. She agreed that the situation cannot continue like this, and that Ethan needs to wake up and see the reality of what Amber is doing to him. She acknowledged that by blindly supporting him, we might have been causing him even greater harm. However, the one who is still not convinced is my father. He insists that we must be there for Ethan, no matter how many times he goes back to Amber. He says that, as a family, it's our duty to support him and not leave him alone in these moments. I tried to make him understand that sometimes true support isn't comforting but confronting. That if we really want to help Ethan, we have to be brave and face him with the reality, as harsh as it may be. But my father refuses to listen. In the end, my mother told me that she understands my position and believes I did the right thing by refusing to go and comfort Ethan that last time. She asked me to stay firm in my decision and trusts that, in time, my father will also understand that this is what's best for Ethan. I know this situation is still very complicated and that I still haven't had any contact with Ethan, but I feel a bit more relieved to know that, at least, my mother is beginning to understand my perspective. My father is a different case, but that's probably because my brother has always been closer to my father, and I've been closer to my mother. That's because they always went fishing or to the park, while my mother and I have always been more connected over things related to women. Edit. Many people are asking if my mother has been unfaithful to my father, and if my father forgave her, suggesting that perhaps Ethan is following the same pattern. And no, my mother has not cheated on my father, I'm sure of that. In fact, Amber's infidelities have strained the relationship she had with my mother. Although my mother has always tried to mediate everything, which is why she has made an effort to get along with Amber after the incidents. It's just that at the end of the day, no one wants to get involved in someone else's relationship. It just hurts us to see him suffer, and we only want the best for him. That's why my mother wants us to be there for my brother, because even though it hurts her, she also doesn't want us to leave him alone. Update 3. It's been about 2 months since my last post, and I must say that things have taken an even more complicated turn regarding the situation with my brother Ethan. To start, I can tell you that the last infidelity with Amber wasn't something as simple as an occasional slip. According to what Ethan has told me, Amber is actually in love with their neighbor and wants to leave the marriage to be with him. I know this because Ethan is now living at my parents' house, which I'll talk more about later. First of all, Ethan explained to me that when he discovered the infidelity a few months ago, he had noticed some strange things, like coming home and finding their neighbor inside. Nothing unusual, just talking with Amber in the living room. But with Amber's history, Ethan was suspicious. So Ethan decided to check Amber's phone as soon as he could, and that's when he found a series of messages that proved that, indeed, Amber and their neighbor were carrying on a romantic relationship in secret. There were only a few messages, because he said it was obvious that she had been deleting the conversation, but it was clear what was happening. Immediately, he confronted her and was able to confirm the truth. That's where my story begins, as he called me to say he wanted to come to my house to talk. But after that, they followed the same pattern, where he leaves the house, Amber harasses him for a few weeks, and he ends up going back to her. But after living together again for a while, Amber told him one day that she was actually in love with the neighbor and didn't want to fix things between them anymore, that she wanted a divorce. Ethan was devastated. He tried to convince Amber to give him another chance and save their marriage, but she stood firm in her decision. Finally, a week ago, Ethan moved to our parents' house, since Amber told him she wasn't going to stop seeing this neighbor while the divorce was ongoing. The worst part is that apparently it's a no-fault state, which means Ethan won't be able to divorce on the grounds of infidelity. This is going to complicate things a lot since Amber will have the right to half of all the assets they've accumulated during their marriage. I know all this because my mother told me. I haven't spoken to Ethan yet, although I've talked to my father a few times and now you could say he's on my side. On the other hand, my mother thinks I should visit him now and console him, but I still have my doubts about doing so. I mean, he's going to get a divorce, but not because Ethan decided to, but because he has no other choice. If I learn something new, I'll give you a new update. Update 4. It's been a few weeks since my last update, and I must say things with Ethan have gotten even worse. A few days ago, I finally decided to visit my brother at our parents' house. I simply couldn't stay away any longer, knowing the terrible time he was going through. When I arrived, the image I found broke my heart. Ethan was a complete mess. His appearance was unkempt, he had several days' worth of beard, and it was clear he hadn't slept well in weeks. He looked like a ghost of himself. Upon seeing me, Ethan threw himself into my arms and burst into tears. Through sobs, he told me I was right, that Amber was a liar and a manipulator who had only hurt him over and over again. He thanked me for not encouraging him to forgive her this time and for setting boundaries. Honestly, at that moment, I was very tempted to say I told you so, but I held back. There was no point in kicking a man who was already down. I know this community likes revenge, but it wouldn't have made me happier to do so. He hadn't done anything wrong to me, other than being a weepy nuisance. Ethan was suffering terribly, and he didn't need me to rub it in his face that I had been right all along. Instead, I hugged him tight and tried to give him all my support and comfort. I told him I was deeply sorry for everything that was happening, but that now the important thing was for him to focus on healing and rebuilding his life. I told him the best thing I could do now as his sister is to help him find a good lawyer. I know a few, but they don't handle divorce cases, though I'm sure they can refer me to one. I know Amber wants to keep the house and that even the neighbor is living there now. I told Ethan that he should go back there since that's his house. He can't keep being Amber's doormat and letting her get away with everything all the time. As long as the divorce isn't finalized, he has to go back there and claim it. If she wants to be with the other man, she should do it somewhere else or wait until after the divorce. I also told him he should fight for the house, as given the neighborhood they live in, the house is worth more than the other assets they have. And I know he's been contributing more to the mortgage, because it's something that's come up in the times I've consoled him in the past. For now, I don't know what Ethan will do with all this, but I'm more than willing to help him with the situation if that's what it takes. Although, I won't deny that I like the idea of confronting a cheater like Amber, especially now that I never have to see her face again. Update 5. Well, get ready because this is going to be a bit long, as Ethan and I went to his house and confronted Amber. We went last Saturday morning because we knew the neighbor wouldn't be there since he works. We did it that way because it seemed much easier, to avoid things getting violent in any way. Although that wasn't our biggest problem that day, it was what happened when we arrived and tried to open the door. We couldn't, the key didn't work. So we knocked on the door and shouted for Amber to open it because we knew she was there since her car was parked in the driveway. Finally, she answered but didn't open the door because according to her, that was her house now, so there was no reason for Ethan to be there. Which was funny because my brother still had things in the house. When Ethan left, he only took some clothes but left many belongings behind, which we later found out that Amber had put in boxes and stored in the garage. We tried to negotiate with her to let us in, but since she wouldn't listen to reason, we had to call the police. After about 30 minutes, a patrol car arrived, and we explained everything that had happened. Luckily, the lawyer I spoke to before we went to Ethan's house advised us to go to the county registrar and look for proof of who owned the property. And since it was in both Ethan and Amber's names, it was easy to prove that it was also Ethan's house. So, the police knocked on the door, and after introducing themselves, she opened it. She tried to explain her side of the situation, but since she didn't have much legal basis for it, one of the officers told her she could make things easy and let Ethan in or take the hard way. Eventually, she agreed to let us in. A police officer also asked her to give a copy of the key so Ethan could make one himself. We could see that inside, there were things that didn't belong to Ethan and clearly belonged to the neighbor because they weren't items Amber would use, like some golf clubs. That's when we also found out that Ethan's belongings had been moved to the garage instead of being in his room. Ethan told Amber that if she wanted to live with the neighbor, she should move to his house or wait until the divorce was finalized. Amber said she wasn't going to do any of that because the house was hers now, but I told her that unless she could pay half the property's value, the house would have to be sold or Ethan could buy it. This is the benefit of consulting a lawyer beforehand. She thought her half of the assets would include the house, but it's not like they had other assets to divide, so she was being a bit optimistic about that. Ethan didn't want to continue paying the mortgage without being able to live in the house, and she wasn't in a position to pay the mortgage alone, so we were at an impasse. After a few hours of discussion with Amber, she agreed to let Ethan live in the guest room, but the neighbor couldn't live there with them. I don't think it's the ideal situation, but given the circumstances, it's the best they can do at the moment. Paying rent and the house mortgage wouldn't be fair to Ethan. As for the house, I'm not sure what will happen because they couldn't agree on what to do with it after the divorce. I know Ethan doesn't want it, but he also can't live with our parents during the divorce. And leaving the house, when his name is on the mortgage and Amber not paying it, isn't convenient for him either. I think selling it is the best option, but it's not my marriage and not my house. When I know more about it, I'll probably update those who might be interested, although if no one in the comments asks, I won't do another update on the topic. But back to this, we were discussing some details when the neighbor arrived, and things got a little heated. First, he asked what Ethan was doing there and who I was, but after we answered, he didn't want to leave the house. Ethan told him he had half an hour to gather his things or he would throw them out, and Amber was saying to give him more time. All while the neighbor was yelling that he wasn't going to leave the house, since he was now with Amber and she no longer loved Ethan. Ethan said he could call the police again if he preferred to take that route, and Amber said there was no need to do that. I'm telling this simply and briefly, but the moment was chaotic and annoying because this guy was very irritating. I don't know what Amber saw in him because my brother can be called many names, as people have in the comments, but next to this man, there's no comparison. This man is ugly and quite disrespectful. Anyway, to make a long story short, the neighbor gathered his things and left. Fortunately, no one got physical or anything like that, although I had the urge to punch him in the face. He's one of those people who makes you want to slap them, but I restrained myself. Then we left with Ethan, me to my house and him to our parents' place to gather his things and return to his house. He's been living there, and as far as I know, the neighbor hasn't visited. I know he could still visit when Ethan is at work or whatever, but at least he doesn't live there. Update 6. Before I start, I have to address all those who said Ethan was going to get back with Amber, but that hasn't happened. I also had my doubts, especially in the final stages of the divorce, but here we are. It's good to see that my brother finally saw Amber for who she really is, even if it was a bit late. To start, as there's a lot to tell, Amber and the neighbor are no longer together. I don't know what happened between them. I don't want to ask or even know. That's why I was worried that Ethan might fall back with her, but it hasn't happened. I guess miracles do exist. And it's because, before the divorce was finalized, she was begging him to come back, saying she still loved him and all that, but Ethan said no. I don't know the details of that conversation beyond what he told me. But at least the divorce has been finalized. The house was finally sold, for those who were asking, and they did it before the divorce was finalized. The rest of the assets were split in half, although Ethan received a bit more from the house sale, since he contributed more to the mortgage. Though I wouldn't rule out that she accepted that arrangement in hopes of getting him back. I don't know the exact details of the divorce, and I haven't asked. I'm just happy that all this is over. As for selling the house beforehand, I think it was the best decision because Ethan was able to move out and didn't have to live there with his ex, which was a toxic situation. It was during that stage, after the house was sold, that Amber ended things with her boyfriend and started trying to get back with Ethan. I have my speculations that the house had something to do with all this, but they're just that, speculations. I'm proud that my brother finally opened his eyes, and I hope he keeps them that way in the future, especially when meeting someone new. If not, you'll have me here again to complain about my brother,